The key to making convincing foreshortening in your sketches is scale and overlap. I break foreshortening down into two categories: overlap foreshortening and proximity foreshortening. In the first, limbs will look shorter because they're pointed towards the camera, whereas with proximity foreshortening, you can have that same effect, but it's more about how close things are to the camera. You'll see in proximity foreshortening that you'll get a lot of diagonal lines and things will feel very, very dynamic. Okay, but let's have a closer look at overlap foreshortening. Whether it be your whole arm or the fingers, whenever you take something and you point it towards the camera, it obscures the length of what's behind it. The more directly you point something at the camera, the shorter it's going to appear. Solid drawing is crucial for animation and storyboarding. When you're learning, it can be super helpful to break the body down into primitive forms and shapes, like cylinders and spheres. As I raise my arm towards the camera, the length of the cylinder seems to disappear, and that front face becomes more circular. By the time my arm is directly out in front of me, we can barely see any of the length of the arm, and the hand is pretty much overlapping all of it. And because I'm standing far away from the camera, there's no change in the scale. Okay, let's talk about proximity foreshortening. When you're standing really close to the camera, whatever is right up against it is going to appear much larger than things that are far away. This effect gets more dramatic if you're using like a fisheye lens, or the closer you stand to the camera. An easy way to get used to a low angle or high angle shot is just think of these tapering shapes. So if I have a low camera down close to my feet, the body is going to appear smaller as it gets up towards my head. And if the camera's up at eye level, then everything is going to taper down by my feet. So in these next few sketches, I've got foreshortening from a low angle camera, foreshortening from a high angle camera, and then our sort of neutral baseline camera. All right, so I'm going to sketch over two of those drawings. I'll start by placing in that tapering shape. Then I'm going to start breaking the body down into primitive forms. So a rectangular prism for the torso, spheres and cylinders for the shoulders and arms. I talk about this a lot in the first figure drawing for animation video. Now, this is super helpful for figuring out how characters are going to change scale in space and how they fit into like a 3D environment. In common practice, like when I'm working, I'm going to do like a loose scribbly version of this when I'm sketching. So I'm once again starting with that tapering shape. I find that if I have that there, it reminds me that the scale has to get bigger down towards the bottom. Remember, there's all sorts of mannequins we can use when drawing the figure. This one's just really useful for showing perspective because it's got all these guidelines. If you combine the two types of foreshortening, so you have overlap as well as proximity, you get a really interesting effect. So you're going to notice as I bring my hand towards the camera here, not only is it going to overlap the arm behind it, but it's going to get larger and larger in scale. So at this point, my hand is completely overlapping the arm behind it, but check out if I move even closer, how much I can exaggerate that effect. Just keep in mind if you're going to exaggerate the scale that it overlaps things that are behind it. Getting a fisheye lens is really fun because you can play around with this. Here you can see that the arm that's close to the camera is way, way bigger than the one that's far away. And as animators, it's really useful to get up and take your own reference. Only you know what type of shot you're looking for, so you might as well go and take the reference yourself rather than sitting online and looking for it. Okay, so let's get into what you're actually going to do rather than just thinking about theory. So the first thing I want you to do is just open up a new canvas, get some reference, and just loosely sketch these poses. Don't try to make them pretty drawings, just try to get a sense of how the scale changes in shape and what sort of tapering effects happen. It might feel like there's a huge gap between these rough sketches and the finished drawings, which there is, but a lot of the legwork is done in this early phase. The next thing I want you to do is take your own photo reference and then replace that with a character model. For this Eva sketch, I used that photo that you saw me drawing over before as a sort of baseline to start the pose. I like the idea of using an animation character model because you know what the finished product should look like, and you don't have to worry too much about the design of the character and just the pose. And feel free to have your underdrawings be loose and scribbly, right? If I'm working on paper, maybe I'll use a light box and a Sharpie, or maybe just a loose light pencil. And in digital, you have the advantage of using layers, but starting out with that loose base sketch is really useful for capturing a lot of energy. All right, everybody, that's about it for this video. Thanks so much for watching to the end. Remember, if you like that, you can sign up over at Patreon to support the channel. And if you want to pick up the recordings of my live classes or join in on a live class, you can do that over at gumroad.com/moderndayjames.